All right, I think it's time to get started. So, welcome to Nordic Northwest. My name is Edward Running. I am on the board of directors here at Nordic Northwest, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today and for this amazing panel we have set up for our discussion, presentation. This presentation came about because of the exhibit that is out in our gallery. Hopefully you've had a chance to visit that and understand what that's about. That was originally created in 2023 as part of the Danish government with this idea of launching ideas around affordability, around housing, sustainability, and community building, but reinventing the urban landscape, reinventing how we might think about housing. That exhibit came to us as part of a grant from the Scan Design Foundation, and we thought that's a wonderful idea to talk about what we're doing here. What are the wonderful things that are maybe behind the scenes even that we don't know about? We all know the challenges that are there, but what are the solutions? And so this is a wonderful opportunity to explore those solutions in our backyard. See what they're doing, sure, in Denmark and being inspired in those ways, but being inspired in our own backyard, I think, is an amazing opportunity we have in front of us. With that, we have our partner who helped us organize this today and bring all these lovely speakers today, Tim DeRoche in the front row here. He is going to help move us through the evening, and I am going to step down because he's better at that than I. Tim comes from World Oregon, an affiliate of the World Affairs Council, and their mission is to broaden and deepen the public awareness, engagement, and understanding of international affairs, engaging Oregonians with the world and with others. I think that's a pretty fitting mission for what we're going to be even talking about today. So thank you, Tim, for helping us organize this and being our partner. On our panel, if you don't already know, we've got some amazing speakers here today. Steve Messinetti, to my left, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity, the Portland region. And Habitat is just in his blood. Working for Habitat right out of college, and his dedication to that organization for the last 31 years? Okay. Catch that. Habitat has gone through many transitions, and so evolving and being part of that, you'll hear more about how things are evolving from that, from Steve and his perspective. Azalea is next to him, Renfield. She's also amazing in her position as the executive director of the William Russell Community Development Corporation. It's a nonprofit dedicated to community and economic development. She is responsible for the strategic direction that oversees all of the organization, including policy, housing, and economic development. The programs related assess the management and its partnerships. You're going to hear some amazing things that they are doing in Portland, and I look forward to that. And then to round out the evening and our discussion is Tyler Bump. And Tyler's background is he is the partner and project director for ECONorthwest. His professional focus is really focused on the intersection of land use planning or real estate investment and the advances in equitable housing, economic development, and sustainable development goals. So we have a pretty rich set of voices here today to bring these ideas forward, and we will go through, each one will present where they're at, what they're doing, and what their accomplishments are today, and what they're looking forward to in the future. And then we'll get a chance for questions and answers. So please, don't be shy, engage. We're looking for a good discussion here as well. So with that, I'll leave it to Tim. Thank you for coming.
So you're going to hear enough out of me a little bit later, so I'm going to get out of the way very quickly. But as Edward said, we're really using this as an opportunity to both lean into the key themes of the Danish Housing Lab, which I hope you all had a chance to look at, and and look at some of the questions that it asks, which are, how do we create housing that addresses some of the more the bigger challenges that we are dealing with, from resource scarcity and new family patterns, influx and migration, historic displacement, and to look at some of the best practices we have in our own backyard. And so to start things off, originally I said I was going to ask questions in between. I think what is going to make sense is, because you each have slides, so we're going to have you go through your bit, then I'm going to sit down with you, and then we're going to jump into some questions, and then we'll all talk together, and then we will all talk together. How does that sound? So I want to invite Azalea Renfield to come up here and start everything off.
Let's see. Thank you, sweetie. Hey, good evening. Happy Wednesday, everybody. My name is Azalea Renfield. I'm the executive director of Williams & Russell. I'm going to take you through a journey. This is a reparative development project. So much stuff to be happy about and excited about, and hopefully we can share our work and can learn some things. I'm definitely learning a lot from you all. So, next slide. So I mentioned earlier that this is a reparative development project. And what that means, go ahead, next slide. What that means is it's a real estate development that seeks to right a wrong or heal damage that was caused by past policies or projects. It's a conceptualization of reparations. What I love about this project is Mayor Ted Willard decided to make a declaration. He apologized to the community of the Northeast and said, you know what, we were wrong. We displaced families, 171 to be exact, 36 businesses, and it's been sitting vacant for 50 years. $50 years. And what I love about this is that the acknowledgement was so impactful and so powerful that we all make mistakes and things happen, not underneath our watch sometimes, but other people's watches, but it's about how do we move forward together. And there's no other way to really do reparative development without acknowledging and addressing the wrong that occurred. Reparations should be both individual and community-based, and must require involvement from local and grassroots organizations to implement it. And I'll tell you more about this initiative and how this came to be. Next slide. Next slide. So a little bit about the site history. Some of you may know this is at the northeast of Portland. It basically used to be the epicenter of Black Portland back in the 1940s and 60s. The city had condemned the land back in the 1970s under urban renewal, and of course displaced 171 families, 74% which were African American. So I mentioned that in 2017, Legacy Health, and you probably heard all over the news channels, and the governor was just out at the site, agreed to convene a project working group to basically figure out how do we develop this land, this 1.7 acres that's sat vacant for 50 years. In order to do that, there were many organizations like Urban League and other notable organizations that wanted to bid this project, but the community, the Black community, said, you know what, we want to start new. Because, sometimes there's bad blood, there's weird, people feel weird about things, so it's just start new and kind of build together, but with intentionality. Next slide. So this is really powerful because you notice that the development team are all people who are notable in their fields and happen to be Black. And some of you may have heard of some of these organizations, and like Colas, Andrew Colas, they've done a lot of building here in Portland and in Washington and Oregon. Kimberly Horner is leading PCRI, Portland Reinvestment Initiative. Angela, who's actually developing our affordable housing, our home ownership and our business hub, which I'll talk about later. And then we have Chandra, who actually did the renderings, beautiful renderings. And then we have Walter Hood, who's going to do our community plaza. You see myself, Azalea, and then of course Bryson, he's the president of the board, who's now transitioned to be my partner because he's been on this project for so long. But what this project, I said this is no ordinary build, and I want to keep put that out there. This is no ordinary build. And what I mean by that is, because reparative development is not necessarily about what I want, it's really about what the community wants. So my mission and task is to lead and do what the community tells me to do, and that community is made up of the board. And it's not any ordinary board, it's really intentionality about who sits on the board. To illustrate, we have JT Flowers, who's with Albina Vision Trust. Some of you probably know AVT. He's our chair. You know, AVT is doing the kind of same work that we're doing. They're our sister agency, but we're kind of outside of their scope. So we're like 2 blocks off, but we're definitely sister agencies. So he's our chair, and this was our chief that's supposed to be community facing and making sure that people are here and that we're working in collaboration and not duplicating work. Kara Sotomayor and Dana are legacy seats, and what we mean by that is they're heritage seats. In other words, they were actually families who were displaced during this whole urban renewal thing of condemning the land. So their families were greatly impacted. So they're really, really going to lead this initiative and say, nope, I remember my grandma this, my grandpa that, and just kind of give us the intentionality, the feel, the heart posture. Then we had 2 businesses, because again, what's community development without housing? What's housing without community development? So it goes hand in hand. We have, of course, our very own James Faison from Faison Construction. He has his own company here in Portland. And also Ebony, who has many, many businesses in Portland. And again, they're all adjacent to the community. And then last, and certainly not least, 3 organizations. There are Black Serving, Black Governed, Black Led, which is Oregon Housing Community Services. You probably heard of that, with Ty Johnson Strain. And then Anthony with SEI, Self Enhancement Inc. And then lastly, and certainly not least, Dana from Portland Housing Center. So again, this board is comprehensive. This board they don't have expiration dates or anything yet because this organization is newly formed. We've only been around for 1 year, folks, literally. But we raised a crazy amount of money. It's on the website, by the way. So you can look at our end of the year report. But it's just incredible about the notoriety on this project. The governor came out on February 28th, was at the groundbreaking, it was all over the news. Certainly supporting this effort. We're going before the state legislator for $8.75 million for our business hub, which is looking really great. Senator Wyden sponsored our bill. Senator Frederick sponsored the bill. It is absolutely crazy how this project is getting so much notoriety. Again, this is no ordinary build. It's reparative development. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the city of Seattle came to us, the city of Asheville, North Carolina came to us, and Raleigh, asking us how we're doing this work. So Portland has a chance to do something so beautiful for people to see, that how reparation doesn't have to be nasty or a bad conversation, but certainly it fits any demographic. Jewish, Asian, whoever was displaced by bad policies, we all can use this framework. That's what's so beautiful about it. This is not about a black project, it's about reparations. Everyone's been harmed in one way or another, so you can take this same work, it's policy diffusion at best. So yes, that's our board. Next slide, please. So again, not just affordable housing. Next slide. Here's the project. Here's the rendering. It's absolutely gorgeous. 1.7 acres makes up 3 comprehensive projects. One, we have the affordable housing, which is going to be for homes for sale. 20 townhomes, 4 with ADUs attached. And it's for the taking. It's going to be ready next year, 2026, Q3. So we're actually building as we speak. We actually go into construction in September. Right now, because the land is contaminated, we're remediating. And it's been a really long process, arduous process, but we're getting through it. We already secured this construction loan, so we're getting ready to build. Not to coin or go to Trump, but you get the point. But certainly we're getting ready to build. That's going to be done in 2026. To the back right, we have our 85 units affordable housing. PCRI, our partners, leading this endeavor, 2 to 3 bedrooms with a child care on the first floor. Then last and certainly not least, we have our business hub, which is going to be a 3-story business hub. And it's going to be a mix of a whole bunch of things that's going to go there. We're working with Prosper Portland and other folks in the Chamber of Commerce to make sure it's not just a place where we just have businesses idling, but they're really set up for success, paying below the market rate, and just having some room for reciprocity to come in and kind of rebuild with some type of generational wealth. And then in the middle, you'll see the community plaza, which is going to be like the place where it kind of all comes together, keeping the synergy coming together, because we want it to feel like a modern, re-envision of what downtown could feel like, but only in the Northeast. So certainly we're working with partners like Urban League and reaching out to folks like that, or whoever wants to be there and just kind of give and lend to the community. So again, it's estimated to cost $124 million. Yes, $124 million and counting. So, you know, the construction is going up. So we'll see what happens. But our costs are good. We're pretty much almost fully funded. So, again, 1 year as an organization. But it's the community buy-in, the reparative development that got people really at the table to kind of follow suit. Next slide. So we talk about intentionality. Look at this beautiful building. We're building with mass timber, and we want to be intentional with sustainability efforts. So we're working with PSEF. Some of you folks know PSEF. We're going to do a plan to net zero, solar energy generation, EDO net zero fellowships, and all kinds of sustainability measures to make sure it stays green, because we want some things to be sustainable and scalable if we can, to keep costs down and makes it easy for both residents and also businesses. Next slide. We're big on equity. We want to make sure women are out there working. There's opportunity for them. We also want to make sure that, you know, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention this. For the people who were displaced from the land, there's a pipe way back. Our whole project, including the home ownership, as well as the affordable housing piece, is governed by the preference policy of Portland Housing Bureau. So we don't get to decide who goes there. Everyone can apply. The link is there. But certainly it will be vetted through the Portland Housing Bureau to determine who goes into those places, to make sure that equity is really restoring what was lost, to give people a chance. So again, it's not arbitrary, like you can get it, you can go. It's very, you know, the list is going to govern that. So again, we have a partnership with the Portland Housing Bureau. The home ownership is the same. It's still governed by the Portland Housing Bureau, but we definitely have the home ownership and then the affordable housing piece. It's two-pronged. Next slide. So just quickly, here's the affordable highlights, the affordable apartment highlights. Again, 6 stories, 85 units, 30 to 60 AMI. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. There'll be amenities. I talked about the early childhood services, which would be the daycare. Again, sustainability is important to us. We want to make sure that things are green as much as possible to keep the costs down. Estimated to be done in August 2027. Hold us to it. And it costs us $66 million. And again, to raise the funding for this is a little bit different because the governor declared, as well as the city council, that, you know, housing is still a matter of contemporary policy. So certainly we know that we want to make sure we build to get people housed. And then last but not least, we'll be adjacent to transit. So that's our affordable housing project. Next slide. I'm almost done, I promise. Affordable home ownership. These are the 20 townhomes I talked about to really target the missing middle. These, again, 3 to 2 bedrooms. We have 5 ADUs on their accessory dwelling units. Down payment assistance will be given to each and every person who wants to apply at $125,000. That's going to be provided by Portland Housing Center. So again, with the preference policy, so it's going hand in hand. Prosper Portland is dedicated to a couple of DPALs, which is down payment assistance. So we're making sure that it's really equitable for folks to get into those places. Everyone have a parking stall in front of their homes, green. This will be done again in June, July 2026. So again, hold us to it. Cost us $18.5 million. And we're almost fully funded. We're like $500,000 short. We have 3 pending grants, so thanks. Next slide. Okay, and last but certainly not least, I always talk about how it's so important. When you think about housing, you really have to be intentional with really figure out how do we keep people housed. And it's not just good enough just to say, here's a place, figure it out. But if we can create commerce and economic development about giving people incentives to actually do business, how do we do that? So certainly, I'm not in the business of helping people get businesses, but certainly know how to facilitate things. So we want to get the people who are good in those things, like Urban League, like MISO, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, to get into these spaces to kind of be available to help people get into what they need in terms of they want to start a business or existing business who need a place to rent. So again, this week there'll be 27 stalls, 30,000 square feet. The renderings, we're getting ready to go into to schematic design now. We just resumed it. So again, if you know folks who want to be in that building, we'd love to have them. Please email me. But again, we want to make sure that there's a sense of commerce there in the Northeast. And this is estimated at $34.7 million, and it's due to be completed in March 2027. So we have real tangible deadlines. Again, everything we do is intentionality. We just received $2.5 million from the 1803 fund. It was all over the news. You probably heard about it. So again, it's just reparative development, which is so beautiful. If you decide to go this route with reparative development, I really, really, really caution you to really be open to all the possibilities of things just coming out of all over the place. So much notoriety on this project, so much support. And again, we've just been around for 1 year. So you can do it. Reparative development is the way to go. It's going to be hard work, but it's definitely the way to go. And I do believe it will be a matter of contemporary policy. It's going to be the next best thing. Just mark my word. Next slide. And then finally, the community space. Again, I talked about the plaza. We got an estimated cost of just a placeholder of $5 million. But again, this is going to be all things synergy, bringing both all three buildings together. We don't know what it's really going to look like yet, because we have to really weigh in with the community and see what they want. Do you want waterfalls? Do you want, stepping stones? And it's going to be more community buy-in. So, next slide. So that's all I have. Thank you for having me. Yay!
So we're going to do a little bit of little question in between, but we want to move this pretty quickly. Azalea, in talking to you previously and in seeing this, I mean, you talked about, so in February you held a groundbreaking ceremony, and this was a lot that sat vacant for 50 years. And I'm not sure people understand just how truly groundbreaking, both figuratively and literally, this really is. And I'm wondering, is there another model for reparative development? Or is this something that is happening in our own backyard that we should all be talking about a lot more loudly?
Yeah. I have looked around for other organizations that are kind of leading this charge and figuring out what this looks like. I've heard this reparative development somewhere in Texas. It was just a journal I read when I was in grad school, but there was no real things I could point to. I think this is happening in real time, folks. I literally was just at the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat talking about this very thing. They're actually bringing us back again this year. We won an award last year to talk about this very thing. I think that we're onto something new, something that's innovative, and I think because this notion of reparative development is like, what's in it for me, what's in it for all of us, and to bring everybody in the room to where it happens, not to quote Hamilton, but certainly to figure out ways on how we can work together and get rid of all the stuff of like, you did this to me, you did that to me, but to really find ways to start new and fresh. Because again, Ted Wheeler already acknowledged the stuff, and it wasn't on his watch, it was just, I know this happened, and just stop. And the community kind of can just pause and relax and to say, okay, now how do we move forward? Because you can't do it by yourself, and you definitely going to have you need government support. There's no way you can do this type of thing without government support and permitting, noise studies, all kinds of, there's just no way to circumvent government. So you got to be in partnership with them. So, yes, I think this is new for Portland.
And I think you told me you believe this is truly replicable and scalable.
Yes.
But I think what is really enticing to me is we're looking at redefining sustainability through a restorative justice lens, and I have not seen that applied to the notion of sustainability so much before.
Yes.
So.
Yes. I think that healing piece is the justice piece, right? It's the acknowledgement is the justice piece. It doesn't have to be like, okay, how much do I owe you? No, because it's not about giving dollars really to people, at least in this way. We have to think about things being scalable and sustainable. How does it serve as many people as we possibly can? Nothing's going to make a difference. Yes, we can acknowledge, thank you, right? You've helped me, you apologize, but again, it's a collective, right? It's not the people who were actually displaced in real time. That was 50 years ago. Some people are still living, some people are older, some people have just kind of just passed on and moved on, but there's still something that happened there. But how do we deal with the folks who are the new generation, who are lost and kind of just out of wealth and don't have opportunities? So this is the way, reparative development.
So for you in the audience, I have a very favorite quote from Gregory Bateson, otherwise known as Mr. Margaret Mead, and it is the pattern that connects. So the pattern that connects the dolphin and the whale and the primrose and the orchid and all four to me. So as we're going through our panel, I'd like you to think about what connects reparative development, what connects middle housing or the missing middle, and what connects on-ramps to affordable home ownership. And with that, I'm going to step up here. I'm going to bring Tyler Bump up, who's going to guide us through some middle housing talk.
everybody. So my name is Tyler Bump. I'm a partner project director at ECONorthwest. Oh, hey, Debbie. I lead a lot of our housing work, economic development work, both here in Portland, across the Northwest, and I do a lot of work across the Intermountain West. And there are a lot of things that we're doing here in Portland and the region that are really unique. The reparative development project at Williams and Russell is certainly one of those. I was talking to folks in Las Vegas in the historic West Side, and they asked me about it unprompted last week. And so that work is unique. It is getting out there. It is very similar to the way that we were talking about sustainability 15, 20 years ago. And it is just kind of amazing to see all of that that's happening in such a short amount of time. One of the other things that Portland and the Northwest are increasingly getting known for is some of our housing policy work and addressing the housing crisis. I'm going to talk about middle housing. What is middle housing? To start that off, middle housing is essentially house scale housing that might have more than one unit in it. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes. I'll go over some more examples here in a moment. Why is it important? I do a lot of work for AARP, Livable Communities Program. And one of the things that we often talk about is how housing needs change over one person's lifetime. You can start off as a member of a family, you go become a young adult, you have different housing needs as a young adult, you might have a family, your family ages. Over the course of somebody's lifetime, your housing changes drastically. And we don't really have the housing stock to be able to meet the needs of everybody in the places, in the neighborhoods, in the communities where people want to live. And so that's one of the challenges that we're addressed through middle housing policy, both at the state level and at the local level. And then the other piece of this is really around righting historic wrongs around exclusionary land use policies. And how do we sort of think about inclusion and think about economic and racial integration at a neighborhood scale that has had policy impacts or policy decisions that have had impacts at a neighborhood and block level. So the Portland Residential Infill Project was in the news a long time ago, 7-8 years ago. I was at the City of Portland when we worked on this project. It was a heated conversation at the time. The state of Oregon passed statewide legislation that all cities, over 25,000, needed to adopt middle housing policies. That is to allow housing types up to fourplexes in all single dwelling zones, single family neighborhoods across their communities. This is the approach that the City of Portland took. Steve was very active in the policy conversations at the time around affordable housing. The original intent of this project was to try to mitigate for one demolitions of single family homes, an anti-McMansion policy essentially at the time. As the housing crisis sort of matured in 2015, 2016, 2017, there was a lot more conversation around housing affordability and how do we try to use this as an opportunity to think about both increasing affordability and reducing the amount of one-for-one demolitions that were happening in single-family neighborhoods across Portland. So that's the Portland approach. On the left-hand side are some real examples of what the policy resulted in. The one thing I would mention, another sort of Scandinavian historic heavy population in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. Minneapolis tries to take credit as the first city that adopted a citywide middle housing policy, and they did pass their comprehensive plan policy, but Portland was the first to actually put zoning and development standards in place to allow it. So we did beat Minneapolis as far as I'm concerned. Seattle, recently the state of Washington passed additional legislation 2 years ago. I'm going to do some other Northwest examples here because I do work across the Northwest. On the map on the left-hand side is a very blurry map of where it's most likely to see middle housing happen in Seattle. We did this for the Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development, and the amount and the type of housing that you might see in Seattle. Seattle's market is a lot crazier than Portland's from a housing affordability standpoint, but it does create much more attainable housing. I wouldn't say affordable housing with a capital A, but attainable housing through this housing policy. City of Tacoma, we also worked with the City of Tacoma, took a very different approach. Tacoma was really trying to use density bonuses and public incentives to try to get affordable housing in different ways than other cities have in Portland and Seattle. They also regulated differently. The things that they really cared about when they regulated through their development standards and their zoning was, is it attached or is it detached? And beyond that, do we really care how many units are in there? So they were sort of regulating how big it is, how does it relate to the neighborhoods, and whether it's a detached or attached housing, and then also trying to focus on affordability and tree preservation as the priorities of public benefits in their project. Showing some more examples here. This is Portland. Most folks will probably be familiar with this development type. We affectionately refer to this as the Portland six-pack. These are 6-unit condos on typically a 5,000 square foot lot, so pretty darn dense for an ownership product. Up until recently has been the most affordable market rate ownership option in the city. Really great housing type that honestly doesn't really get built elsewhere outside of Portland in this way. This is a result from the residential infill project. This is a cottage cluster that recently got finished. This is during the snowstorm this winter. The house on the right was an existing single-family house that was preserved. There were 5 additional units in these cottage units that were built around it. This is in my neighborhood. This is about 2 blocks from my kids' elementary school in North Portland. This is an example in North Portland and some arguments that this tenant in this new middle housing is having with their neighbors and how their neighbors felt about new development. But this is an example of small infill in a vacant portion of a site that used essentially the backyard of another house. Smaller townhomes, we're seeing a lot of these kinds of things getting built, side-by-side townhomes on very small lots. It could be 2 units, it could be 4 units, it could be 6 units, but we're seeing lots of these getting built. A few more examples. Another 6-pack. And then also to mention that this isn't just a Portland thing. This is Littleton, Colorado. This is middle housing type that was built just outside of downtown in Littleton, Colorado. This is Seattle. You can kind of tell by that, the hill there. Pretty steep hill. Phoenix. Henderson, Nevada. Missoula, Montana. Very Missoula, Montana there on the design side, the materials on the left. Another courtyard in Missoula. The other thing that's really coming up as cities and states have adopted middle housing legislation, the zoning that allows these housing types, is to think more about affordability, especially on the homeownership side. And so one of the things that we're really getting asked by our clients a lot in cities and communities in which we work is how do we achieve affordable homeownership and what does that look like? So we're spending a lot of time thinking about the different options available, what we call alternative ownership options, really thinking about land leases, cooperative ownership, shared equity things I'll talk about in a second. And also, how do you think about conventional ownership options in what we call fee simple? So that's you own your house, you own your land, you own your townhome. How do you make that affordable long term? How do you think about affordable condos? So we're starting to take this sort of housing type that people need in different locations and thinking about how do we approach that from a financing perspective and from a development perspective to create more affordable home ownership. So there's different benefits to thinking about alternative ownership options, affordability, stability, wealth building in different ways. And again, some examples, because I want to share that these are real things that are happening in Portland and the Northwest. And oftentimes more in Washington than in Oregon, just because there's not a lot of lenders that do this kind of blanket mortgage product for shared equity co-ops, for example. It's been a thing on the East Coast for a long time, happens more in Washington. Boulder, Colorado has a weird amount of them, but not too many here happening in Oregon. So this is a community land trust model homestead in Seattle and Finney Ridge. 2 19-unit buildings built with affordable condos. Again, this is a sort of traditional affordable condo model, all between 60 and 65% AMI. A lot more information on there that I'm going to talk about. This is a project called the ULO Housing Co-op in Seattle. This is a shared equity cooperative, 68-unit building, 1 to 3 bedroom units, affordability at 80% AMI or less. The monthly cost for the co-op fee, you can see here, 1 bedroom to 3 bedroom, anywhere between about $1,900 a month to $2,900 a month or so between a 1 bedroom and a 3 bedroom unit in the sort of core of Seattle. So this is a very expensive market where 80% AMI is really substantially higher than it is in the Portland market, but does get more attainable housing than otherwise would be possible. Deed restricted townhome condo units, ARCH. It's a consortium of affordable housing developers and affordable housing providers in East King County. They've been doing this for quite a while. These are townhomes, condos, 60 to 100% AMI. And this is an interesting one in Eugene. This is a townhome cottage model. This is an old Presbyterian church. You can kind of see on the bottom left-hand side of the photo here. The interesting thing here is the long-term financing. So there is a mortgage lender in Eugene that did a blanket mortgage for the co-op here. But the other important thing is that it's really hard to make these affordable. Even if you can find the right sort of innovative lending projects or innovative lending products to do that, the financing is still really challenging. So in addition to the blanket mortgage, $2 million from the legislature, almost $1 million from American Rescue Plan. City of Eugene contributed a bunch of money. Different foundation and grant fundings, about $1.2 million. So the capital stack, the funding stack to be able to make this work at 60% AMI in Eugene is really challenging. You can get something to work for an alternative sort of ownership model, a co-op, at 80 to 120% AMI, honestly, pretty well without public subsidy, which is one of the reasons that we're working on them a lot at this scale. But once you get to below 80%, below 60% AMI, it really does require some level of public subsidy to be able to make these things happen. Okay, there will be more questions, I'm sure. I want to keep on time for us, so thank you.
God, you brought up so many things and so many questions, but I also want to save some of the questions to throw at everybody, because I think we're seeing a lot of questions that cross over into each other's playgrounds and backyards. But one of the things I'm interested in, you were talking about alternative ownership models, and some of those seem like ideas we've seen in European cities. Mm-hmm. And you've spent time in Copenhagen, haven't you?
Yep.
So how is that experience working and being abroad influenced the way in which you're looking at some of these projects?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things when I think about some of my colleagues that do this housing policy work in Denmark, in places like Copenhagen or Aarhus or Aalborg or Odense, in different parts across Denmark, is that they aren't doing this middle housing thing from a policy standpoint. And they ask me how the heck that's possible and how we've actually done that. So there are some interesting things that we're doing here in the Northwest that our friends in sort of progressive Scandinavia are having a challenge to from a policy standpoint. On the funding side, social housing is funded a lot better in Scandinavia. One of the things, the gaps that I've seen that I would be really interested in here is around pension-funded housing. So a lot of my friends that live in Copenhagen or Aalborg are faculty at universities, and they have unions, and their unions have pension funds that own the housing that the union members live in. And so one of the things that I have seen a huge gap for is how do we think about pension funds? California pension system, for example, is one of the biggest investors in multifamily housing on the West Coast. Why don't we think about how pension funds and unions sort of get together and think about affordable housing long term? Why haven't we seen teachers' unions do that? So there are a lot of things in Scandinavian countries, Denmark specifically, that are just really different from a social housing funding standpoint, but I do think there are opportunities to apply some of those lessons here.
That's great. I have more questions for you later, but let us get Steve up there. Yeah, if you could keep your presentation to a haiku, we'll be right under time.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So good to be here. I drew the short straw, having to follow Azalea and Tyler, but it's good to be here. Such great projects. Steve Messinetti with Habitat for Humanity. I'm going to hit a little on Habitat, our global work, our local work, and also on the housing challenges that we've been facing. I've got a thing here. So Habitat for Humanity, you've all heard the name. We're a well-known nonprofit. We're actually a global organization working in 70 countries around the world. Our mission is to bring people together to build homes, community, and hope. And our vision is a world where everyone has a safe and affordable place to call home. We actually got started 49 years ago on the first interracial farm in southwest Georgia during the Civil Rights Movement. So that's kind of our birth, and really the focus of our work has been to provide opportunities for people who've been left out. And that mission of bringing people together, we've actually now helped about 50 million people with a housing solution across the world. And the goal is to help another 50 million over the next 3 years. And those numbers are only possible not because we're building that many houses. We build a lot of houses, and we repair a lot of houses, but because of the involvement and the engagement of people, millions of people in this work. So the influence we have through that, through policy changes, through different market solutions, really is how we have greater influence. I want to just hit on housing in general. Not everyone here is a housing expert. This is just a great kind of slide that shows what a healthy housing continuum looks like. It used to be that folks could kind of work up this continuum, and maybe even they're in some type of supportive housing or emergency housing, and they can get support they need to move up to a subsidized rental housing and eventually save money and actually buy a home. Unfortunately, that world doesn't exist anymore. Work isn't working anymore. I'd say we have really for the first time a market failure when it comes to housing. And there's a huge gap, right? A lot of folks are starting to say that a lot of middle-class people are just waking up to the reality of our housing crisis because their families are their children are having a hard time finding a place to live. But that clog in this continuum really is around home ownership, right? It's such a big leap now for folks to be able to buy a home. Home prices in Oregon have gone up 7 times more over the past 10 years than people's incomes. So home prices have gone up 7 times what people's incomes are over the last 10 years. So that gap, that is becoming further and further out of reach. And when people can't buy homes, they're stuck renting, which puts more people in the rental market, which causes more pressure there for rents to go up. And we've unfortunately seen huge, especially since COVID, increases in evictions, over 5,000 in just the first 6 months of this year. And that, of course, is just feeding into our homelessness crisis as well. Of course, another key issue we have is about 1 in 4 households in Oregon pay more than half of their income on their housing. So renters are stuck in these high rent situations, and most of their income is going to their housing, not leaving enough for other basic life necessities. Some of the more recent shifts we've seen have to do with skyrocketing land costs and construction costs. Obviously, home prices, as I've mentioned, really very little housing subsidy. There's a lot of affordable housing dollars out there, but very little of it goes to actually helping people buy homes. And then, surprisingly, 20% of the single-family homes that are on the market here are actually owned by Wall Street investors. So that's been a recent phenomenon that's gone up significantly over the past few years. Let's see, I had a stat for that. Can't find it, but that reality that we're now, first-time buyers are competing with Wall Street investors to buy that single-family house, and they're obviously showing up with cash. One of the biggest challenges is that the entry-level home market has all but gone away. It used to be that 60, 70, 80% of the homes that were on the market were affordable to your average income buyer. That's down to below 10%. And that's just in the past 10 years that really has gone down. Both there's not a market to build those entry-level homes, and then there's not the financing for folks to get into them. At Habitat for Humanity, as I mentioned, born out of the Civil Rights Movement, and our focus really has been providing opportunities for those who've been left out of these homeownership opportunities to buy their first home. The average income of our buyer here in Portland is about $45,000 a year. And 75% to 80% of them are households of color. Large percent are single parents, mostly single moms. A high percentage are people with disabilities that we're able to actually design the home for to meet those specific needs. And of course, the disparities due to decades, really centuries of intentional racist policies keeping folks from homes. The gap between white home ownership and black home ownership is larger here in Oregon than most other states around the country. So black families own homes at about 40% compared to 65%, and that 25% gap hasn't changed in 50 years. So the Fair Housing Act passed in the mid-60s, and the gap that was in place then between home ownership rates in black and white households hasn't improved in the last 50 years. That's really striking, right? In terms of Habitat for Humanity, well, how does that work? How do we help a family who makes $45,000 actually buy a house that costs over $400,000 here? We work with bringing the community together, businesses and individuals, volunteers, churches, youth groups, to build the house. As I mentioned, that's a key component because it's not just about the house, it's about changing hearts and minds and encouraging people to do more than just volunteer. We also work with banks to ensure that the buyers get an affordable mortgage that's no more than 30% of their income. Every home we build actually is built to the Earth Advantage Platinum level of sustainability. We know that just like the housing crisis is impacting lower income households and households of color more than any other, so does climate change. And we are also building homes to last because we know that the families that buy our homes typically stay long term. Every year we have families who've bought homes from Habitat here 30 years ago who are making their final mortgage payments. And then the buyers also participate in that community building effort to build their homes. We also have built into our deeds on our homes and our sales what we call lasting affordability, which is also referred to as permanent affordability, or a land trust model, where this home is not just affordable for the buyer today, but it'll also be affordable to future buyers. And there's a restriction on the resale, also has to be to a family that's under a certain income. So it's home ownership, they have a stable payment, they build equity, but there is a restriction on the amount of appreciation they can get, and it's shared basically with the community. So all the subsidy that goes into that house actually stays in the home. It's just a map of the homes that we're building right now, either finished recently or continuing to build. If you're from this area of town, we've got a site in Hillsdale of 52 homes on a property that came to us from a church. We've got another one from a church in Southwest 52nd and Taylor's Ferry. And then our first project in Lake Oswego, which is pretty remarkable. The first affordable housing project in Lake Oswego. We're building 23 townhomes there. Here's the site we just finished, 40 homes. This is almost everything we build fits the description of middle housing. That's a triplex, and this is a 40-home community of townhomes, all 3- and 4-bedroom homes. And it's on about 2 acres of property. So 2 parking spots for each house and small play area and so forth for the kids. And here's the Lake Oswego project that we're just breaking ground on now, starting to frame houses. So looking for volunteers. That's it.
Thanks, Steve. So you just mentioned what I believe is your largest community project to date, the Gooseberry Trails in the Hillsdale neighborhood. And I think what I've been intrigued with, Edward and I have been talking about this quite a bit, is that it was developed on 5 acres purchased from the Greater Portland Bible Church in Southwest Portland. So how did this come about? And you did an earlier project, I think it was Rivergate Commons. Was that an early template for this kind of project?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, churches have been a key partner for Habitat for Humanity since our founding. And in recent decades, churches have been key partners in providing the land that we need to build on. So often churches either have back acres that just aren't getting used or parking lots that are way more than they've ever grown to need as they originally envisioned. It actually, this project with the Greater Portland Bible Church in Hillsdale was the second project in partnership with that church. About 15 years ago, they came to us and said, hey, we've got a half acre, an old house on the lot that we used to have missionaries who return lived in, and we'd like to do something positive with that. So we built 7 townhomes on that half acre on the corner right in front of what we're building now. And that just grew to a wonderful partnership with the church, their folks coming out to help build. And then when they decided they really needed to get rid of a big part of their parking lot that they were paying a big check to the city for their stormwater management on, they contacted us and said, hey, what can we do next?
So I think that this is really exciting. So Edward Running and I were talking about a storyline, the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition, and there's something, every year when they do polling, Portland always comes up as, voted, one of the most godless cities in the U.S., yet I see the intention of goodness and care that comes out of the city. And I think what is exciting about this is galvanizing faith communities to stand up and address the regional housing crisis by taking creative stewardship of the land that they have. Are you, I'm asking this of all of you, are you more hopeful that we'll see more of this type of work?
I can take a little bit. In Colorado specifically, there's legislation to allow faith-based organizations to do more intense development on their land in ways that are different than changing the zoning, middle housing zoning or other zoning in other places. A lot of the communities that I work, there's a lot of conversation with faith-based organizations, with churches and faith-based organizations around wanting to do good and wanting to address the housing crisis in their communities, while at the same time they're they're sort of dealing as organizations with declining attendance and declining membership in many places, and what does that look like for their long-term financial sustainability? And so I do think there's a lot more partnerships that are happening at the individual sort of faith-based organization level from a standpoint of doing good, but also that they're, as organizations, trying to figure out how to mitigate for financial risks for their organizations too.
So, Tyler, one of your focuses has been working with cities and business districts around leveraging economic development and community revitalization goals, but it is always a tricky dynamic to look at economic development and revitalization without triggering gentrification and displacement. So I'm curious if you can speak to any particular projects that might illustrate best or better practices around balancing revitalization with more people-powered, equitable housing and sustainable development goals.
Williams
And you all
Russell
can
CDC
jump
is
in
a good
here.
one.
I was actually teeing that up to get back to.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I mean, Steve's been involved with Living Cully and some of the work with the Neighborhood Prosperity Initiatives, which is like a community-based economic development strategy that's been in place for, 12 years or so now. And I think a lot of those organizations have done a good job of sort of organizing community at a neighborhood level and also sort of supporting economic development, local community economic development, but also thinking about anti-displacement strategies and equitable development at the same time. But I don't think it was until recently with Williams and Russell CDC and Albina Vision Trust that to a scale has gotten bigger on a site, and also that the decision making around what that looks like and who benefits is also shifting. And that's just happened recently with some of the good work that folks in Northeast are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I want to keep saying that economic development and housing go hand in hand. There's just no way to think about sustainability without knowing that people have ways to make money, ways to invest their money, and that there's wealth creation. There's just no way. I think Williams and Russell has done a fantastic job in that, because everything we talk about is wealth creation. It's about making sure that when people get into those home ownership, that there's actually down payment assistance at a real meaningful level. I mean, you think about $125,000, say, here's your down payment assistance, $125,000 grand. That's amazing. Most people can get $30,000, $50,000, especially in today's world, but to get over $100,000 for a down payment assistance, towards your equity line, I mean, it's amazing. So I definitely think that we're going to see more and more of that. And just to touch base on the whole faith-based, I think there are so many opportunities. I live in California. I go back and forth from Portland to the Bay Area, Marin County. And we just had a bill to pass with churches reinventing the way they see their land and really building housing on it. So we're seeing it already happen in California. I'm sure it's going to follow suit in other states, because I think there's just, churches care about their people they serve. There's no other way to see people do that in such a meaningful way. And churches have all this land with, declining attendance and these big lots, right? They're really ready for the taking. It's just, and churches want to be intentional with helping people. So yeah.
Well, so to that point, so you came to Portland from California. So how different has it been for you navigating the cultures of Portland versus our southern neighbors and the challenges of places like Belmont and San Francisco and Palo Alto to build coalitions and actually move or spark change?
Yeah, it's funny, because when I first came here, I thought in which I came with something to give. Never did I imagine I would receive so much love and support, and the pure notion of just, let's hear what you have to say. And I think the ability to want to listen, and it's twofold. It's reciprocal. I listen, they listen, we share, we learn together. And I think I came in with, California have a lot of problems and a lot of issues, but economic development and housing in Palo Alto, places like Palo Alto that are very affluent. Belmont is very affluent. And they work for, East Palo Alto definitely had its challenges, much like the Northeast. But to work in such really big, drastic communities, right, and to live in Marin County, and just to kind of find out like what works, what doesn't work, but how do we do this and bring people in from that middle housing in a meaningful way has been unbelievable. I think I've been able to do the work that I do is because of the community partners that I have. It's the community trusted me to give me a chance, and it's really, the feedback loop is really, I think of things in systems. There's a book by Dana Meadows called Thinking in Systems, read it in grad school, totally recommend it. And we think about organizations being effective and efficient, you really have to have those feedback loops. and I'm constantly listening. I'm listening more than I'm even speaking. Tanisha had to bring me here to talk, because I'm always usually in the background as an administrator, but certainly not a public-facing person. But it's the accountability piece that makes me be here for things like this, to show our work and to tell about our work so people can take note and, learn from best practices. And I'm also learning from trial and error what doesn't work, right? The victim of a danger, the danger of a single story can really just damage you. So we're constantly in a meeting. I'm constantly saying, hold us accountable. All of our 990s are there. All of our end-of-years reports are there, just to be completely upfront and to not surprise the board with any surprises, but to be really honest and intentional with our build. So, yeah, that's kind of where we are.
So Williams and Russell CDC received $2.5 million from the 1803 fund, which was part of a broader $8 million investment in 11 organizations supporting Black communities. How significant will this investment be, and how do you think this might accelerate momentum around restorative and reparative development?
Oh my God. What 1803 did was absolutely transformative to this organization. I don't think that we'll have the ability to do as much work as we're doing, because that really took care of all of our operations for 5 years. And it's not just money just given, but there's real accountability, there's real mechanism, there's real work. We're meeting quarterly with other organizations that were selected to be a part of as a recipient, to figure out what's working, what's not working, and to have real conversations. We have a budget deficit because we need to build this land, and the federal funding shut down. How do we mitigate that to keep the project on schedule? And it's also real, show me, did you expand capacity? What percentage? What tools are you using? So it's not just take it and run. No. It's show us the work. We're holding you accountable. We want metrics. Everything that's meaningful must be tangible, achievable, and measurable. And that measurable piece is the part that's really going to be our indicator to know that we're making progress over a 5-year period. So it's been monumental.
So each of you in some way referenced the preference policy. And I want to bring this up. People often associate habitat with building physical structures, but I think one of your real secret powers is burrowing into policy and, as you said, changing the hearts and minds. So it's actual true systemic work. So what came to mind is the North and Northeast preference policy, which I believe is a tool for addressing generations of gentrification and displacement. In essence, a right of return. So can you each talk about this policy, how it came into being? I know that you played a role in this. Tyler, we were talking about it before the program. What projects have each of you been developing as a result of this work? And how significant is this as a policy for the city?
Kick us off. I was around when that got kicked off. Mayor Hales initially dedicated $20 million of the interstate urban renewal area funding to help people with housing through what was going to be called the preference policy, which gave preference to households that had generational ties to these neighborhoods, historically Black neighborhoods in North and Northeast Portland. We were actually very involved in the initial phases of that to advocate for some of those funds. Initially, it was going to be a rental housing program for some of those funds to get dedicated to homeownership as well, which happened. And we've had now 2 projects we've completed, both in North and Northeast Portland. One was a 12-unit project. Another was a project right across the street from a church that we partnered with on a previous project, who then actually partnered with us to transfer some density for us to be able to do a project. But both amazing projects, and we're excited now to have a 50-home site in North Portland on Cary Boulevard. That'll be our next project in partnership with the city, as well as with Portland Housing Center, who works to have families go through that process. They first go through the city to get points and be put on a priority list, and then they work with the housing center to become mortgage qualified, and then they work with Habitat to actually buy their house.
Either of you can jump in.
Yeah, I would just, the preference policy is really interesting. It's a local tool and a local policy that addresses local historic decisions around investment and displacement. And I think it's really important to note that that policy took place specific to local decisions in North and Northeast. It wasn't around other people making decisions, around local decisions. and around those that were generationally tied to the area. And so it's a really, really fascinating and really crazy good policy because it sort of skirts these lines around fair housing, around how do you actually achieve reparative justice and right to return around fair housing goals. How do you think about what are the mechanisms to actually fund that, and how does that connect to funding? And we had urban renewal and an increased set-aside amount and the affordable housing stuff. And at the same time, it's just a huge amount over time of activism from the community. And that, leading up to that point with the Northeast Community Development Initiative, and there was just a lot of community-led things that made that happen at a time that was really interesting. But it's an interesting policy, and there's been a lot of other cities that have tried to sort of replicate that, but I don't know necessarily of any that have done that as geographically targeted in a way that's been as policy effective as that.
I think for me, I think it really is the hallmark of my job, because it really is about how do we, if we're repairing a wrong due to policies, bad practices, how do we make sure that we're actually doing our work the way we want to do our work? And I think the preference policy really makes it so much easier for all of us because we don't get to decide. And I think there's, sometimes people get lost in politics and I can hook you up. Let me call a friend. No. There's no circumventing. It's like that list is there because there was a lot of people behind it that put that together and said, no way, we're going to make sure that we're in fact doing this the right way. No one can get into that system. It is through the Portland Housing Bureau to make sure that the folks in those units that we're building are so beautiful. Because otherwise it'd be so easy to say, come on, I'll get this friend, that friend can discriminate. No. It governs us. And we just acquiesce and say, here's the availability we have, who's next? And if they're not ready, next. And the list is open to the public. This is the one thing I learned by being here is that I didn't know that preference policy list was open to anybody. Anybody can get on the list, whether it's the home ownership piece or the affordability. Sure, there's criteria, but you can get on the list. And then if you get called and make sure you have everything you need, then certainly you'll be able to get into those units. Because we don't know if it's actually getting to the people who are displaced, but certainly it's people who are eligible, deemed qualified to be in those places, whether it's home ownership or affordable housing.
So I'd love to get your questions. Edward, would you mind grabbing a mic? And if people in the audience have questions, we would love to get to them. If you don't have questions right away, I have 19 others that I will continue to ask. And while he's standing there, did you have a question? There we go. I feel like a game show host now. Down front.
Hello. Azalea, I really just loved your presentation on what you're doing on such a very small, focused piece of land. And it really seems like we should be able as a community in Portland and Hillsborough and other areas is to find those little 2-acre lots. You're doing a tremendous amount with very little. And it really seems like you're building a community. I mean, it's not just infill. I kind of look at what Tyler was saying, and a lot of that was infill. You're trying to take existing home lots and make as much as you can with it. But what are we doing as a policy and for the community to identify those 2-acre, 3-acre lots where you can do a tremendous amount?
Yeah, I think certainly I inherited this. They issued. They basically got a recruiter to find me, and I came in with all this stuff, the work already done. But what I can say that's so different from California is that because this community that came together, who were in essence infected by this land, they were so intentional. Because I think sometimes when we just build housing alone, sometimes things just kind of happen. Things kind of. People get displaced, people fall on hard times, people are, these big, beautiful builds in the middle of nowhere sometimes because, land costs money. You have to find surplus land and all these different things. And it's expensive to build. It costs a lot of money. So oftentimes it's, the developers become a victim of just where there's availability. But I think when you think about these little spaces, this 1.7 acres, it's a block, literally. And all the imagination of all the things that can happen on that one block. And that's when you get really intentional. You get architects who know the lay of the land. Can we do this? Do we have the authority to do this? Will this be a zoning issue? You know, you start to imagine. I think it's the audacious to be bold. You just have to be bold and audacious and say, you know what? What if we have an epicenter? What if we create like a downtown? What if we create like a mini mart? You have to be audacious and bold and just reimagine. And the good thing about this is this imagination piece is you bring people in the room like you all and say, what do you want to see? And just start high and start working down. And you start thinking about budget authorities, what can be done, zoning, and get experts who are good at that stuff and know that stuff and say, sorry, you can't do that. Residential zone, no businesses. No gas, no, you could say those things, but I think that's where it really starts, is just being audacious and bold and saying, how do we want this community to be? Because when you walk out your door, you want to say, you know what, I'm thirsty. Do I have to really get in the car and drive like 3 exits down, or kind of just go to the nearby corner store or the grocery store or the post office? You start thinking about these things that you want close to your community. And so that block becomes more than just a home. It becomes a community, it becomes a child care, it becomes businesses and commerce and all these things, all on this 1.7 acres. So, yeah.
I would say there's an incredible amount of land owned by our local cities and school districts, and we've talked about churches, and that's starting to, I think we're starting to see accountability there, that it's been sitting vacant for many times decades. We're about to get a property donated in Southeast Portland from the city of Portland that a mayor 10 years ago committed to donating to Habitat, and it's taken that long to get through that whole process to finally get it transferred. So, but there's I think effort to improve that process, so that's more likely to happen more.
Ooh, lots of them.
I'd like to ask a difficult question of you, Ms. Renfield. 26% of the dislocated people were not African American, and I was wondering how you incorporated them in a restorative justice system. And I was wondering how you determined who can buy those houses, given the sort of complex legal environment we have with recent Supreme Court decisions about not being able to use race as a determination.
I'm glad you asked that, because that has been a big question for us, because we don't want to violate any fair housing rules. That's why the preference policy is so wonderful, because the preference policy is, in fact, open to anyone. Now, granted, are we conscientious about who we will want in those units? 171 families, 74% African American, sure. But that was also 50 years ago, right? So it's like we don't know if those people are still there. We don't know who has legacy there. And I think that's why the preference policy is so brilliant, because if there are new people who are, I would just say maybe underserved in different ways, they could get on that list, right? So black, brown doesn't matter. We can't discriminate. So it's just, if they're ready to go, they're ready to go. And it may not be all black, it may not be all Latino, it may not be, it's going to be anything that's on their preference policy. So again, the intentionality is still there, but again, that list is whoever's going to be, that's who we serve. So that's how we get around it, because the list is made up of, if they were to break that list down, we don't know what the composition is going to be in terms of race and nationality. We have no idea. We really just don't know. But we can rest assured that we do have people making sure they're income eligible, the household composition makes sense for those units, so we get to step out of it and step aside and not really have to worry about that, because we're not in violation.
And,
so, yeah.
And Tyler, didn't you mention to me that the policy itself was written during the first Trump administration, and they did a little bit of gymnastics around terminology?
Yeah, I think it's intentionally not race-based, and it is focused on this sort of history and around generational ties to the community, which is consistent with the Fair Housing Act and fair housing laws. And so in that way, it is very intentional about what it's trying to do. It is also very clear that it's the black community in Northeast that was most impacted by those decisions. And so it's not, the policy itself isn't about race. The policy is about generational ties to the area and who was impacted by those local decisions. And it's a very important distinction when you talk about the preference policy and the application of that, both in funding and in selection of future residents, future business owners, and who's able to sort of benefit from the good work that the community is doing there.
This is for Azalea. You talked about Williams and Russell as a national model for other restorative justice developments happening throughout the country. What are the top 2 or 3 lessons that you hope they will take from Williams and Russell and apply to their project?
I love, love, love that. The first thing I keep saying is government has to be your friend. There's no way of getting around it. I love this because the relationship that we have with Prosper Portland, and in many cases, you know the story that they, PCC, the former name, was the one who kind of made this kind of happen in so many ways. However, they've come to be great allies, great supporters, and they've helped us truly with this through this initiative. PCF, we know there can be a little, people, PCF is PCF. Everybody has their thoughts on it, but they've been a huge partner for us. We have lots of money from them that helped us. It really is, I think the biggest lesson, 3 lessons I could say, is that government has to be your friend because you can't do it alone. There's way too much government interference, red tape, question marks, DEQ, navigating that department. It's so much that you have to go. So you can't be like, we're going to do it alone. There's just no way. You just can't. So government has to be find out who your partner is going to be at the government stages. Community is going to matter. The community organizations, AVT, Albina Vision Trust, 1803, all these organizations, SCI, Urban League, all these organizations that are adjacent to that property that you're serving must be at the table. They must have a seat at the table. It's so important because, again, community is led by the community, for the community, by the community. You have to have those people there. You just can't do it. And then lastly, I would just say willingness. I have met so many people who've been absolutely amazing, so willing to help. So, like, what can I do to help? Whether it's make a flyer, be it, go before the state legislator and testify. Prosper did something unprecedented. When we had to remediate the land, which was really, really bad, they let us reallocate $10 million to reassign that money to remediate. Prosper is in the business of economic development, not necessarily cleaning up dirt and moving dirt. So there's stuff like that. And again, it was unprecedented. We were audacious. We made that and said, hey, we don't know if we're going to get the money from Legacy Health. You guys know about the OH. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Dismantle now, glad we got out of there. But this is why partnerships matter. Prosper let us do that. And the board approved us, say, you know what, we see what you're trying to do, we're going to support that. Because we can't have a business economic development center with the land's not clean, right? So those relationships matter, and I think once you cultivate those things, you are going to be so poised to succeed. And I mean, you see how everybody's, and people want to know who's there. If you go to our website, everyone who touches project, from janitors, from the governor, they're all on the website. And it's not for us to tell you that. You can see it yourself. You should not have to call me and say, who's helping you? No. Every funder's there. Every developer's there. You know for yourself, because it's like, okay, she's being transparent. She's showing everything that needs to be shown right before your eyes. And I think that part, people can say, oh, the governor's on this. Oh, Lou Edwards is on this. And people just start falling in, like, okay, you're building credibility. And again, 1 year as an organization. It wasn't to my own, it wasn't because of me. It's because all the people that's all adjacent. There's no single person that's making this happen. It's because we're all in it together. And that's reparative development. We all have a vested interest. So that's my lesson.
So I love the idea that government should be our friend. However, in the skinny budget request issued last week, the administration was proposing cuts that would decimate HUD's vital affordable housing, homelessness, and community development funding, in essence leading to a full request that would slash the budget by 44%. Yeah. So are you at all hopeful that local public-private partnerships and investment like what we're seeing from 1803 or faith communities and human-centered homegrown innovations can be enough to sandbag against these types of challenges?
I mean, there's not enough local money to make up that in local government, if we're looking at many other forms of private investments possibly. I am still hopeful that some of that can get avoided. From our colleagues in DC, even all of the Republican counterparts who support housing, who support a lot of this work, are still quietly trying to avoid these cuts because it's so bad for every state. So housing, again, is it's a priority for everyone. So my hope more so falls in still avoiding some of those cuts that Brian talked about.
I think it makes a stronger case for us to think about local and regional funding sources to be resilient in the face of federal funding challenges or changes in the sort of economy more broadly. And, you know, PSEF is an example. You might love it, you might hate it. It is a funding source that was approved by the voters that has done a lot of things that it was intended to do. And so if we think about local funding for housing, local funding for economic development, local funding for climate, regional funding, we are seeing a trend across the communities where we work where communities are trying to start to realize that they need to figure out a path forward themselves, and that was before the federal funding sort of conversation that's happening right now, because there's much more funding that's needed. The federal funding that was there before wasn't enough to address our problem. And so I think most regions and most local governments are trying to figure out what that looks like themselves. The affordable housing bond, Portland Affordable Housing Bond, created a huge amount of affordable housing in a very short amount of time. And a lot of that was in, we talked about the preference policy, funded housing ultimately to support the community goals in some of those places. And I think we're going to need to think more intentionally about how do we fund things and what are our priorities for our communities and our cities and our regions that we live. And we have to think about Portland, we have to think about Beaverton, we have to think about Hillsborough. We are a region, our housing market is regional. God forbid we think about Vancouver. That's part of our region. But that's a massive trend that we're seeing in other places, trying to figure out what to do and how to fund stuff, whether it's services or whether it's housing.
And I would just say, I'm still hopeful. I'm still hopeful. I think Senator Wyden has been phenomenal with helping us get money from the Small Business Administration, from HUD. We secured all $700,000 out of there in real time, really quickly. There was staff still there committed. Again, the willingness to say, let me help you invoice this out. So it's just, I know, again, we don't necessarily like big government, and many of us don't, and neither do I, really. But it's the people. It's the people there who are still trying to do in some God's work. I mean, people need housing, and I think if people, we can't let off. The moment we start feeling like all is gone, we lose. No one thought that this project would be off. I think so many people said, it's been vacant for 50 years, it's not going to happen. And look what we did in 1 year. And I say 1 year as an administration, not necessarily as all the work that happened before that. But again, we get all this notoriety because of people who were stayed committed and going to your legislators. Like, I've met with Wyden many times. I've been almost at the state capitol asking for, for support at Salem. Like, we have to talk to people, even if we don't want to talk to them. We have to talk to them and just say, look, this is the case. Housing matters. It's a human right. We need to make sure that people get access to it. And the moment we stop, we lose. So we just got to keep fighting. I have fight all in me, so I can do it. We all can do it.
So that brings us back to why we're here, which is we have the Danish Housing Lab here. And the whole point of us getting together is to look at the Mobius strip of good ideas. As you looked at the projects and the ideas that shape the Danish Housing Lab, are you seeing anything that you would like to import? I mean, tariff-free, of course. And if you could export any of the good work that you're doing to Copenhagen or other places, what would you focus on?
Well, I specifically love the idea about single-parent housing and using commercial space for housing. I think those are phenomenal things we can all learn from. I think too often we think about, well, at least in the Bay Area, a lot of rehabilitation housing, HIV housing, but we don't think about single-parent housing, which is a growing trend. I mean, how many people have been, I'm single now with my kid. I'm a 9-year-old, and a 12-year-old. Long story. But anyways, it's a lot. It's a lot of work, and if I can have access to housing as a single parent, that's half the battle. I think that would be something I would like to look into. And even with the commercial space, all this commercial space downtown that's just sitting empty, there's the opportunity right there. So I think that'd be great to see that implemented.
Well, and to your point, I don't know if any of you noticed this, but there are 37 separate family patterns that the Danish government recognizes, which is so forward-thinking, and we should be thinking beyond this very, very narrow definition of what constitutes a family.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All the research shows that mixed income communities are best for everyone. And that's what I saw a lot of here. And it's really hard to do. You're doing it with Williams and Russell. It's just amazing and innovative. But because of the funding sources, it's really hard to have rental housing and homeownership housing and housing for low-income people and market housing all in the same place. And I saw a lot of that. And I think that would be the hope, because that's really what's best. It's not great to have all low-income people here and all high-income people here, and folks got to move and work together and so forth. So that goal of achieving that mixed income, whether it's in the same building or in the same neighborhood, I think is really important.
I think the single parent thing is also super important. I don't think we understand that whole like spectrum of housing needs and how we're thinking about folks and making sure that we've got options in all communities and all neighborhoods for different phases of people in their lives. And I think it's just as important to think about older adults as we all age. We're going to reach peak older adult when the elder millennials become 60 years old. And that is, the housing market is going to need to adapt in very different ways to be able to meet that need, and things are changing really quickly. And I think the need to be flexible, I guess, in how we think about housing types is really important, and also being intentional around, it's not just an apartment for somebody who's renting, it's not just a single family home for a traditional family. Things are there's a huge spectrum of need, and being intentional about how we think about that. I went to one of the events too, and thinking about specific housing types and how that relates to emotional and mental well-being for people specifically, and how are we trying to, we don't talk about that. We don't think about that. Well, maybe we think about it, but we don't talk about emotional and mental well-being and how that's related to design and housing and where we get to live. And I think that's more important now than it probably ever has been, and that's one of the things that has really stuck with me as part of this exhibit, is just thinking about that emotional and mental well-being part of it.
Great. We are really kind of coming up to our time. What I would suggest is we're gonna thank our speakers. We're gonna thank you, and they're gonna be standing here. So I would say, why don't you come up and ask your question to them? What?
One last one.
One. Okay.
Hey, this is a really interesting, in-depth conversation, and it's beyond my policy knowledge. But I kind of expected someone to talk about the role of the banks in the original damage done to the African American community, and wanting to avoid a repeat of that kind of situation. Is there a role for banking reform in helping you realize your housing dreams?
I did have a slide on that. That was one of the ones that got cut out in terms of the historic wrongs. One of the biggest barriers around more home ownership development, especially multifamily like condominium development, is the risk tolerance for banks to provide the lending for the projects, the construction lending. So absolutely, there's a role for financial institutions to play to allow for these projects that are seen as higher risk, as well as on the lending side, right, on the mortgage lending side. And we're seeing some banks come in with 2-3% interest below market for the buyers that meet a certain demographic. So we're seeing folks step up. But yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't. A lot of the younger people that I work with who are highly educated, who have great careers, who aren't available or able to afford anything, I think about them often and what they say, and I think the expectation that housing is going to increase in value forever is something that, as we think about housing, we kind of have to grapple with culturally, and our financial institutions and our banks need to think about how are we securing our assets and what does that look like in terms of a loan product, and are values going to be going up forever, and how do we plan for that, and what does that look like 20 years from now when we do have a vastly changing demographic composition and demand changes. So I think the banks are going to need to grapple with that themselves. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that we just plan on housing going up forever because we treat it as an asset.
And I would just say for me, I think for the whole banking thing, that's how I met my dear friend right there, Tamara Heritage. She's a Heritage Bank vice president. She's the one who got us our accounts. I've been really intentional with who you connect with. A lot of our money that we need is really through bank lending, the Federal Home Loan Bank. We have both application out with San Francisco as well as Des Moines, and we have to have a sponsored bank. And so we're intentional with how we make sure that we create and work with people of color, just to get ourselves to make sure we have the there's reciprocity there for everybody, because it's really about keeping it in the fold and, intentionality with everything that we do. I think that's why when we got to development team, everybody's of color, and we want to make sure we kind of be intentional with those things, and bankers, and just keeps bleeding up, hopefully, but not to be exclusionary, right? It's still like people, the willingness piece is so important that we, again, we're in this together. The moment we start just going like this is us, then we're no good than the people that put us there, where those harms happen. So we have to be really mindful of that. It's a fine line to walk.
So innovation requires risk. It also requires accountability, and we know what has worked and what has not. We know where the harm has been, and I think we've been hearing some very, very good ideas. I think in some ways, perhaps the 19th or 18th century mercantilist structure of banks has not caught up with the good ideas of community building and the we are the ones we've been waiting for ethos often. So that is up to us to keep throwing into the town square the good ideas, the better ideas, and when it matters, a quarrel with Providence. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank you. I want to thank Nordic Northwest. It is such a big pleasure for World Oregon to be able to partner with Nordic Northwest. If you haven't spent time with this exhibit, it is up through the end of the month. It is a small exhibit filled full of rich, rich ideas that require repeated visitation. So take your time with it, and thanks, and enjoy this darn nice weather.
Thank you.
Thank you.